So what is AmeriSpeak? I'm not sure if you folks heard about AmeriSpeak earlier, but this is NORC's probability-based multi-client household panel. AmeriSpeak is a probability-based panel founded in 2015, and it's funded and operated by NORC at the University of Chicago. It produced more than 900 surveys since 2015, and the advantage of panels are its efficiency, where we are already interviewing recruited individuals to the panel. So the recruitment costs and time is saved in these surveys. These survey topics have been on government policies and programs, communications research, health services and policy, health outcomes, political and social attitudes, opinions and behaviors, as well as consumer products and services. So the panel has conducted surveys in a variety of topics. The panel is representative of the entire US population because it leverages NORC's national frame, which I'm going to be talking about later in my slides. And it is representative of hard to reach populations such as low-income households, less educated persons, young adults, rural households, and persons who are less interested in the news and social and political conservatives. Here is an overview of AmeriSpeak. There are 40,000 number of participating households in the US for AmeriSpeak. This has been an expensive endeavor to recruit, but at the end, within the 5 years, now we are getting that investment back. So about 350 client surveys completed since it's first founded. The panel recruitment response rate is about 24%, but the panel recruitment response rate where we have conducted non-response follow-up efforts is 34%. There has been years where we weren't able to do non-response follow-up just because of the pandemic, and B, there has been some years we wanted to gather more households into the panel and cut down the costs. So we wanted to go with mail and phone recruitment methodology. So we did forego the face-to-face recruitment method. But where we have included face-to-face recruitment, of course, our recruitment rates increased drastically. And I'm going to, again, talk a little bit about that face-to-face non-response follow-up effort further in my slides. So AmeriSpeak does a two-stage recruitment. The first stage is the phone, mail and phone contacting. And as I mentioned, the second stage is the face-to-face contacting, which is the non-response follow-up effort. And I'm going to provide more details on this in a second, but I wanted to give a quick overview of what I mean by initial recruitment and NERF recruitment. So AmeriSpeak sampling frame uses NORC's national frame. So this NORC's national frame is based on USPS delivery sequence file, which includes almost 92% of the addresses within the US. So it's definitely a postal delivery sequence file. So it is used for addresses, and then NORC supplements this with in-person enumeration in rural areas, and hence increases the coverage to 97%. So as we know, within the total survey error spectrum, coverage error is one of the important error sources. So by using an enhanced national frame, AmeriSpeak aims to eliminate, if not decrease, the coverage error as much as possible. NORC's national frame includes the area probability sampling design based on 126 national frame areas, which are called NFAs. And the second stage select segments within each NFA. So at least one NFA per state is sampled into AmeriSpeak's sampling design. And in some years, this DSS is supplemented with a general DSF sample in addition to national frames DSF in order to increase representatives in key states. Segments with higher minority, such as Hispanic and non-Hispanic Blacks, are oversampled, and high Hispanic tracts are also oversampled. So as I mentioned, we had a two-stage recruitment. The first is the initial recruitment, and the second is the NRFU recruitment. NRFU stands for, again, non-response follow-up efforts. So in the initial recruitment, we... oh, go ahead. So in the initial recruitment, we first sent a pre-notification postcard. 5 days after the pre-notification postcards to the American households, we sent a 9x12 recruitment packet with pre-incentive, study brochure, and privacy policy. The reason we wanted to send a larger package and envelope is because this package sets itself aside from the regular mail. In the US, junk email, there's the issue of junk email. People get a lot of unnecessary mailings. So in order for people to open the envelopes, we are trying to make sure the look and feel of the envelope is very different than marketing mailings or junk mails. So that's why we use the 9x12 recruitment packet. 11 days after the pre-notification postcard, we sent a reminder postcard. Then 18 days later, we sent an optional reminder postcard to the non-responding households. I say optional just because we decide based on budget and yield rates whether or not to send that second reminder postcards. We also allow inbound calls, which is the call-ins. We include a phone number that the people can call us within the mailings. In the mailings itself, we also include a URL to the recruitment survey. So we have several, the households have several ways to reach us through both web and phone. If we don't hear back after this many mailings, if we don't hear back from the household, then we give them a call. We match the phone numbers to the addresses using vendor data. It's not 100% accurate, but it definitely has a high accuracy rate and high match rates. So that is another effort to bring in non-respondents to the household. So the second stage is the NRFU recruitment. Again, it's a non-response follow-up effort where we spend a lot more money in terms of, we do send in-person interviewers to the household, as well as we send a FedEx package and the initial the recruitment package through FedEx. So and then we also use enhanced incentives during the NRFU stage because it's very expensive. We select 1 in 5 non-respondent households into the NRFU sample, just because it would be very, very an expensive endeavor to include all the households within the sample to the NRFU stage. So we use, just like matching phone numbers, we also use consumer vendor data to target and oversample households that are likely to have young adults from 18 to 34. And the reason we specifically target young adults is because they are less likely to respond to surveys in the US, and also Hispanic and non-Hispanic Black, just to make sure that we have that diversity within our panel. So the benefits of this sampling strategy is that it significantly improves our recruitment rate. It goes from a 6% recruitment rate through mailings and phones to a 35% response rate. As you might know, people are less likely to refuse when you knock on their doors and visit them in person. So this whole oversampling methodology and NORC methodology also brings in reluctant to respond panelists or reluctant to respond households or sample members. So because it brings in younger Hispanic and non-Hispanic Black, high school or less panelists. And I'm going to also in further slides talk a little bit about NORFU's benefits and what it brings. But there is definitely a cost associated with NORFU. So each NORFU recruit is 1.5 more costly than the initial recruit. I think nowadays it's even double the price, double the cost in terms of financial costs, and it slightly increases the design effect. But overall, 52% of the AmeriSpeak panel is recruited in the non-response follow-up stage. So that cost is well worth it. So when we look at the response rate for recruitment years with NORFU, again, because of the pandemic, it's definitely an unusual time for all of us. I'm sure, your in-person studies have been impacted too. So I'm not necessarily going to talk about the response rates with recruitment years without NORFU, but generally talk about recruitment years with NORFU because it's our regular recruitment process. So overall, our panel recruitment is about 34%. Our panel retention is about 88–89%. So once we recruit people into the panel, we are going to be but we are good at keeping the panelists once we establish that social trust as well as keep them within the panel. Our subsequent survey completion rates varies from 25% to 4%. Because 4% is when we have really, really fast studies. So if we need to complete a study in a couple days, then the recruitment rate, the response rate and the yield rate really suffers from it. And then in terms of the cumulative response rate, it's approximately then about 9 to 15% response rate. So cumulative response rate, we take into account panel recruitment rate, retention rate, as well as the actual survey completion rate. So when we look at the AmeriSpeak panel demos versus the benchmark, we see that AmeriSpeak actually does pretty well in terms of education. We see that AmeriSpeak lacks these high school grad, so the lower educated folks we are lacking versus we get a lot more panelists who have some college education and college education, but we are able to correct for that error using a weighting methodology or our post data collection weighting methodology. So we correct these issues at the back end after the data collection. In terms of income, we also see that we are bringing in a lot more lower educated, but lacking in comparison to benchmark, lacking high income households. So we bring in more low income households and then lack in high income households. But again, we slightly adjust using the weighting methodology for this different. And we generally use benchmark statistics using census data, American census data. And in terms of age, as I mentioned earlier, we generally, AmeriSpeak panel generally doesn't get a lot of people who are 18 to 24. Again, we correct this during post-data collection adjustment. Same with non-Hispanic whites. Our methodology, because we oversample non-Hispanic, Black, and Hispanics, we are doing very well in terms of bringing them into the panel, and then we do some adjustments at the back end to make sure that our composition matches to the census composition. And females definitely respond more than males. Again, we correct that in our data adjustment methods, through our data adjustment methods, and then we do very well with households with children. So now, as I mentioned, we do have this really large non-response follow-up effort where we include in-person and FedEx recruitment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of it to the AmeriSpeak data quality. So in this study, and this is a study that I conducted a couple of years ago, it was in fact a few years ago, pre-pandemic, when we were really heavily using non-response follow-up methodology. So in this research, I've investigated 3 different research questions, but the bigger big picture research question was, what's the impact of non-response follow-up during panel recruitment on AmeriSpeak data quality and study estimates? So I specifically looked at the impact of non-response follow-up on response rates. And then after that, I looked at the demographic representation of the panel sample, and then whether it had an impact on the study estimates, which is the most important part. So in what ways NORC panel recruits differ in their opinions and attitudes and behaviors in comparison to the initially recruited panelists among different AmeriSpeak studies. So while response rates are one of the indicators of panel quality, they provide only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the panel representation and quality. So accordingly, and subsequently, we compared overall panel composition as well as the composition of the panelists recruited during the initial and NORC recruitment stages with census ACS benchmark distribution to better understand how NORC impacted the panel composition. So when we look at the panel composition and compare initial recruits to NORC recruits and compare it to the ACS benchmark, we see that NORC definitely brings in younger panelists that we are highly lacking just because they are harder to recruit and they are much more reluctant, especially because they may be more transient as well. And then we see that our initial recruits are generally older. They do have an established household. They don't really move as much. So it's easier to bring in, to contact them through the initial recruitment stage. And then when we look at the race ethnicity composition, we see that NORC brings in more Hispanic minorities, as well as when we look at the education, we see that initial recruits overrepresent higher education. So NORC corrects this educational bias by bringing in more lower educated panelists. So after that, when we look at the estimates from some of our really high profile studies, so for instance, we look at University of Michigan NASA scientific literacy study, we have seen that our male and phone recruits tend to be more interested in the current events, but fewer face-to-face recruits are very interested in the news. And then we are able to correct that error by bringing in more face-to-face people. Why do we care to provide people who are less interested in news, for instance? Because We want to bring in not just correct for that composition impact, but we wanted to bring in people with different attitudes and behavior into the panel. In this study, I actually looked at many different studies that we conduct, as well as a lot of different variables, but I'm just going to provide a small sample due to the time limitation. And then again, when we look at the NASA scientific literacy study, we see that our initial mail phone recruits tend to be more pro-science compared to the face-to-face recruits. And then our NERFU corrects for this and bring in people who are not as strongly pro-science. And then when we look, and then we also looked at John Hopkins' study on public support for gun control policy study. Again, we see that face-to-face recruits provide more middle-of-the-road views, and face-to-face recruits more strongly opposed to the gun control policy. When we look at another study that we are actually doing a second round of is the Legal Services Corporation's Justice Gap Study. Again, our mail phone recruits are more likely to perceive institutional unfairness. And then when we look at our AARP retirement study, we see that mail phone recruits more likely identify as Democrats versus face-to-face recruits more likely identify as Republicans and something else. And then mail phone recruits more likely report a political ideology, whether it's liberal or conservative, versus face-to-face recruits either haven't thought much about it or they are more middle of the road. So I don't expect you folks to remember all these findings, but what I'm trying to show is that we see significant estimate differences between our initial versus NERFU recruits. So looking at the cost benefit, we see that the money that's spent is definitely well spent when we bring in face-to-face recruits. Another study where we have replicated general social survey using an experiment, and we have seen that face-to-face recruits trend towards more conservative positions, for instance, on issues like government spending. So what does this all mean? We see, what's the summary? So mail phone panelists recruited with less effort are more prone to being very interested in news. They are pro-science and they have liberal policy positions, versus face-to-face panelists, who are recruited after greater effort, are less prone to being very interested in the news and more likely to report conservative policy positions. Now that we talked about non-response follow-up, I also want to discuss a little bit about potential mode effects that we may be seeing within AmeriSpeak. So before going to that, I also want to talk a little bit about our mode strategy. So after the recruitment stage, we actually only use web and phone in order to conduct our studies after the recruitment. So while in the recruitment stage, we use a lot of different modes, including, mail, phone, web, and face-to-face, almost all traditional modes. When it comes to the subsequent studies, we ask for mode preference of the potential respondent or our recruited panelists, and they give the choice either responding to our surveys through web or via phone. We have about 85% of the panel responding to the surveys via web and about 10 to 15 responding to surveys via phone. And the reason we only use these double mode methodology is A, for more efficiency, and B, by not bringing in a lot of different modes, we minimize the mode effects. But the general aim of it is because of the efficiency purposes, given that web is much cheaper. So given that in the subsequent survey stage, we use a double mode, we still are using a mixed mode methodology. So in order to, that's why we have then examined a study using this mixed mode and whether if this mixed mode is decreasing our measure or increasing our measurement error and causing mixed mode effects. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits, pros and cons of the mixed mode design. So the benefits of a mixed mode design is allowing people to complete surveys on either phone and or the web can increase coverage and enhance representation. So a large portion of the public does not have access to the internet and prefers not to take survey on the web. So many households are wireless only and also are difficult to reach via phone. So by combining these modes, we are increasing the panel representation. Also, research shows significant attitudinal and behavior differences between those with and without internet access. So, but there are also disadvantages of using mixed mode design. It can potentially lead to mode measurement effects, and there could be differences between those who complete the survey on the web and those who complete it on the phone based on the interview mode. So, phone mode features interviewers while web mode is self-administered, and phone mode presents questions verbally while web mode presents questions visually. So that stimuli differences may also cause mode effects. So in this study, our research questions was when there are differences between those who complete the survey on the web and those who complete it on the phone, are those due to mode selection effects or mode measurement effects? So when I say mode selection effects, it's the good type of mode effect. And then when I say mode measurement effects, it's the bad type of measurement error. And whenever we talked about the mode effects, it's people tend to view it always as the bad kind of mode effects. So people generally refer to the measurement effects. However, we also, if we look at it from a more comprehensive perspective, actually, there are also mode effects that are good, which is the selection effect. So by mixing modes, researchers want to maximize representativeness and capture mode selection effects. But researchers want to minimize the bad mode effects, which is the mode measurement effects, due to the different stimuli between self-administered and interviewer-administered, in our case, for instance, because we are comparing phone versus web. So the challenge is that respondents often select their mode, so it's difficult to disentangle the mode selection from the measurement effects. So accordingly, we did experiment and we have conducted a survey experiment to explore whether the differences are due to selection or measurement effects. So this study is done with one of my colleagues, David Sterrett. He and our team have conducted the study. Generally, our panelists' usual mode is phone and web, but in the experimental study mode, we have assigned all of our phone panelists into the phone condition in our study. But when it comes to the web, we have divided the web portion into phone and web in our study. So our web panelists who say, I want to respond to your surveys via web, were assigned to phone, and then our web, the rest of the web panelists were assigned to web. So accordingly, here's the composition of how we have done this experiment. So the web and web group gotten about 1,800 sample cases. The web and phone group got about 1,000, and the phone and phone group got about 900. So we have used about 3,600 sample size our sample size was about 3,600 for this study. So we have conducted a 15-minute survey with wide range of topics, including political attitudes, view on social issues and economy, personal finances, participation in social groups, news behavior, personal health, and medical care. Accordingly, what we have done is we have compared to the phone and phone mode to the web and phone mode, and then the web phone mode to the web and web mode in order to disentangle the composition effect from the actual measurement effect. So we have seen evidence of mode selection effects, meaning the good mode effects. So we see large differences in self-reported health between the phone and web groups. And the web phone group looks very similar to the web group. What does that mean? Because we have the similar type of people between the web phone and the web group, we have by conducting the study and administering the survey to these similar types of people through both phone and web, we were able to measure whether the differences are due to the instrument differences. And in this case, with the health behaviors, we didn't really see much differences. So this is all to say, if you see the web and web phone look to be similar, that's good. If we see phone look different than web phone, that's good, because those are two different samples. But if we see similarities between phone and web phone, that means that we see some bad mode effects. And if we see dissimilarities between web phone and web, that means that it is the bad kind of mode effects. So again, the difference between phone and web group are significant in regression, controlling for age, gender, race, ethnicity, income, education. So here we do see an evidence of the good mode effects. So when we look at the financial situation type question and finance related questions, we do also see evidence of mode selection effects, which is the good mode effect. So we see large differences in likelihood of having a credit card between phone and web groups, and the web phone groups much more similar to the web group. And then we see differences between phone and web group when we control for all the important demographics. Again, we see the good types of mode effects when we look at the questions related to immigration. Again, large differences in likelihood of saying benefits of immigration outweigh the risks between phone and web groups, and the web phone groups looks very similar to the web group. And then we see that our phone and web group are significantly different. That's similar with the questions related to when we ask whether most people can be trusted, we see web phone groups to be much more similar to the web group. And then we see much more differences between the phone and the web phone and web differences. So again, we see the good kind of the mode selection effects. Same with the marijuana use. So the drug use, we also see large differences between phone and web phone and web. And then we see web phone and web to be similar. But we also see some evidence of measurement mode effects. So as I mentioned, selection mode effects are good, measurement mode effects are bad. So when we talk about sensitive topics, so for instance here, the issue of the discrimination against Blacks are a big issue in the US. So when we talk about issues that are very sensitive, we do see an interviewer presence make an impact. So we do see differences in attitudes about discrimination against Blacks between phone and web phone groups. So we see that our web phone group looks a lot more like our phone group rather than web group. And that's because questions such as this one has potential mode effects related to social desirability bias and differences between the interviewer and self-administered mode. So nobody wants to admit that they discriminate against African Americans to an interviewer, for instance. So we are all conducting ourselves a lot better when we are around other people. So our takeaways here is that there's strong evidence that offering a mixed mode design improves sample coverage and the representativeness of the surveys. So those who choose to complete a survey in one mode, which is phone, are very different on some key attitudinal and behavioral issues than those who choose to complete in our surveys through web. And then many AmeriSpeak phone panelists are also recruited by in-person non-response follow-up. And these cases help improve sample representativeness. Again, this is coming from a study that I've conducted. But researchers should definitely be aware of the potential mode effects and design the questionnaire to mitigate such effects. So limit questions prone to the social desirability bias.